Claire Hemsworth was the town's favorite school teacher. Ronnie Wexler was the man no one ever noticed, until he committed a murder so savage it left even veteran investigators questioning their sanity. In the quiet town of Maplewood, where crime was a rarity and trust ran deep, a brutal killing unearthed a decade-old secret, a forgotten tragedy, and a chilling quest for revenge. This is not just the story of a murder, it's the unraveling of lives stitched together by guilt, silence, and a darkness no one saw coming. Maplewood was the kind of place that looked like it had been pulled straight from a postcard. Nestled between rolling hills and quiet forests, it had one main street, a cozy diner that served the best pancakes in the county, and a police force that hadn't seen a murder in over a decade. Residents left their doors unlocked, kids rode their bikes until sunset, and everyone knew each other's names. It was peaceful, predictable, and the last place anyone expected to become the center of a gruesome investigation. That illusion shattered on a crisp October morning when a local jogger named Helen Price took her usual early route through Silver Pine Park. The park, with its narrow dirt trails and tall pine trees, was a favorite among locals for its calm atmosphere. But that morning, something was different. As Helen jogged past a thick patch of trees just off the trail, she noticed a strange shape on the ground. At first, she thought it was a pile of clothes, or maybe a deer hit by a car and dragged off the road. But as she stepped closer, what she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. Lying motionless and half covered by leaves and soil was the mutilated body of a woman. Her face was unrecognizable, and her limbs were twisted in unnatural positions. Her clothes were torn, and the surrounding area was stained with blood. Helen stumbled back, screaming before running to the nearest house to call the police. Within the hour, the entire area was swarming with emergency services, crime scene investigators, and a small crowd of shocked onlookers kept at bay by Yellow Top. When the body was finally identified later that day, it sent a fresh wave of shock through the town. The victim was Claire Hemsworth, a 29-year-old elementary school teacher who was widely respected and adored. She had lived in Maplewood for over 5 years and was known for her kind heart and dedication to her students. Her sudden, violent death was not just tragic. It was unthinkable. There was no immediate explanation, no apparent motive, and no clear suspect. Detective Marcus Delaney was assigned to the case. He had served the town for over 2 decades and seen his fair share of tragedies, but nothing like this. When he first arrived at the scene, he expected something typical, a robbery gone wrong, maybe an accident. But the closer he looked, the more unsettled he became. The scene was too clean in some ways, too deliberate in others. There were no drag marks suggesting a struggle, no defensive wounds on Claire's hands, no personal belongings nearby. It was as if she had been placed there with disturbing precision. Delaney's instincts told him this wasn't a random act of violence. The level of brutality suggested deep rage, but the arrangement of the body suggested planning. Forensic teams worked through the night, collecting every piece of evidence they could. But what they found offered little help. There were no fingerprints, no shoe prints, and no DNA, at least not anything that could be linked to a suspect. As word spread, the town's mood shifted. Fear replaced the usual friendliness. Parents kept their children home from school. Residents locked their doors for the first time in years. Rumors began to swirl. Some said it was a drifter passing through. Others whispered about a secret Claire had kept, something from her past. But no one knew anything for sure. Detective Delaney spent the next few days combing through Claire's life. Her apartment showed no signs of forced entry. Her phone and laptop were intact, but her recent messages and search history offered no clues. Her friends described her as cheerful and caring. She had no enemies, no bad relationships, and no recent conflicts. It was as if someone had chosen her at random or had waited a long time to strike. For the first time in his career, Delaney found himself disturbed not just by the crime, but by the silence that followed it. It was as if the killer had vanished into thin air, leaving behind a message written in blood and pain. And somewhere, hidden beneath Maplewood's polished surface, he believed a much darker story was waiting to be uncovered. As the days passed and leads began to dry up, the investigation into Claire Hemsworth's murder took a new direction. Detective Marcus Delaney, still haunted by the scene in the park, was determined to find answers. He returned to the beginning, Claire's life before Maplewood. Though she had been living in town for 5 years, her earlier years remained largely unexplored. Digging through background checks, employment records, and school transcripts, Delaney began to piece together a quiet but complicated past. Claire had grown up in a neighboring town called Brookhaven, about an hour east of Maplewood. She had left shortly after graduating high school, and her trail went cold for a few years until she appeared again in Maplewood. What caught Delaney's attention was a line in an old local newspaper archive from 2009. Claire Hemsworth had served as a witness in an assault trial involving a man named Brent Keller. Brent had been convicted of a brutal attack on another teenager after a heated argument outside a party. Claire had testified as the key eyewitness, placing Brent at the scene and helping seal his 8-year prison sentence. The name Brent Keller wasn't familiar to most in Maplewood, but to Delaney, it suddenly felt important. A man who had spent nearly a decade behind bars because of Claire's testimony might have a reason to hold a grudge. A search of recent parole records revealed that Brent had been released 2 years prior and had not registered any fixed residence since then. That made him difficult to track, but eventually, officers traced him to a remote cabin in the woods near Pine Hollow, where he had been living off-grid and mostly alone. When police approached him, they expected resistance. Instead, they found a man who appeared emotionally unstable, but not hostile. Brent allowed them to search his cabin. It was cluttered and dirty, filled with old magazines, empty cans, and the unmistakable signs of a man who had been isolated for too long. However, what they didn't find was any evidence linking him to Claire's murder. His alibi, surprisingly, checked out. On the night of the murder, Brent had been admitted to a local clinic after a minor car accident caused by icy roads. Several nurses and a report confirmed his presence there. Though cleared, Brent left the detectives with more questions. Among his personal items was a weathered photograph. It showed 4 teenagers, arms around each other, smiling in the sunlight. One of them was clearly Claire, another was Brent. The other 2 were unfamiliar to investigators. The back of the photo was dated 2007. A quiet note was scribbled in faded ink. Us 4, summer before everything changed. That simple phrase stuck with Delaney. It hinted at a deeper story, something buried in the past that maybe no one wanted to remember. Investigators began to dig into school records and community archives. What they uncovered was troubling. During the summer of 2008, a local teenage boy named Eli Vexler was killed in a hit-and-run. The incident occurred late at night, on an empty road near a lake where high schoolers were known to party. Despite some suspicion surrounding the teenagers involved, the case had gone cold. No one had been charged, and there were rumors that evidence had mysteriously gone missing. The victim, Eli Vexler, had been just 16 at the time. His family had moved away shortly after the case was closed. The community had forgotten, but the name hadn't disappeared from the public record. Delaney now believed that Claire's murder might not have been random, or even related to the assault case at all, but something more personal, a revenge for a tragedy long forgotten. If Claire and the others in the photo had been involved in that fatal accident, then someone could be hunting them down one by one. But who would know the full story, and why had they waited so long? The investigation, once confined to a small town's peaceful surface, was beginning to unravel layers of secrets that had festered for years. And whatever had started with Claire's brutal death was far from over. Just as the investigation began to feel like it had hit another dead end, an unexpected development gave Detective Marcus Delaney a glimmer of hope. A local wildlife photographer, Elena Marsh, contacted the police with something she thought might be useful. She wasn't sure at first if it was related, but after seeing the news coverage of Claire Hemsworth's murder and realizing the timeline matched, she felt compelled to come forward. Elena had been working on a personal project, tracking nocturnal animal movements in Silverpine Park using motion-triggered trail cameras. She had several cameras hidden throughout the park, including in remote areas not commonly used by hikers or joggers. After reviewing the footage from the night of the murder, she found something strange. One camera had captured a brief clip at 3:12 a.m., showing a shadowy figure dragging something along the ground through the trees. The footage was grainy and dark, but investigators immediately noticed one crucial detail. The figure was wearing a dark parka with a distinctive large patch on the back. It appeared to be an emblem, round, with faded writing that was hard to make out. The image was sent to analysts, who enhanced the video as best as they could. After hours of careful examination, they confirmed it. The patch matched the uniform worn by employees of the Maplewood Sanitation Department. Detective Delaney and his team pulled employee records and quickly narrowed their search to those who matched the build and shift pattern suggested by the footage. One name stood out: Ronnie Vexler. The last name rang an immediate bell. Eli Vexler, the teenage boy who had died in the hit-and-run 15 years ago, had been his younger brother. Ronnie had been just 19 at the time of Eli's death, and had quietly stayed in Maplewood, living a modest, almost invisible life. Ronnie had no criminal record, no history of violence, and had worked his job without issue for years. But to Delaney, the connection was too close to ignore. The team arrived at Ronnie's home with a search warrant. It was a small, unremarkable house on the outskirts of town, tucked behind a row of evergreens. What they found inside sent chills down their spines. The house was dimly lit, quiet, and filled with signs of obsessive behavior. The basement, in particular, was disturbing. On the walls were dozens of drawings, twisted sketches of figures bound, faceless, surrounded by dark scribbles. In one corner sat a collection of photographs, many of them clearly taken without the subject's knowledge. Among them were several images of Claire, at the grocery store, walking home from school, sitting in the park. She had been watched for months, maybe longer. The most horrifying discovery came in the form of a box hidden beneath the basement stairs. Inside were Polaroid photographs, graphic and disturbing. They showed Claire in various stages of the murder. Her body, her face, the arrangement of her limbs. It was undeniable proof not only of Ronnie's guilt, but also of the level of planning and control he had exerted over the crime. It wasn't impulsive. It had been orchestrated, rehearsed in his mind over and over again. Ronnie was arrested on the spot. He didn't resist. In fact, he barely spoke. During questioning, he refused to answer most of the detective's questions. He offered no motive, no remorse, no explanation. His expression remained cold and unreadable. It wasn't until investigators ran a background check on him that the final, grim puzzle piece clicked into place. Ronnie had never forgotten what happened to his brother. He had never believed the hit-and-run was an accident. And over the years, that grief had grown into something darker, something far more dangerous. Ronnie hadn't just killed Claire. He had built his life around the moment he would finally get revenge. The horror of what they uncovered was enough to disturb even the most seasoned officers. But worse still, Delaney feared this was only the beginning. Claire had been one of 4 in that old photograph. Now, with Ronnie in custody, the real question was whether his revenge had ended, or if there were more names still on his list.